Hi there, it's Chad Mills. If you've ever bought or sold real estate, you have likely found yourself inside a title office talking about title insurance. Well, in this video, we talk with April Baladez, Escrow Officer at Highland Lakes Title in Burnet. We're going to go over what is title insurance, why it is important, what is a title commitment, and we'll go through the various schedules that accompany a title commitment and explain what each are and why they're important. So if you've ever had questions about title insurance, this one's for you. Enjoy. Okay, thanks April for doing this.
You're welcome.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about title insurance, and what I'm going to do is turn April loose to tell us what title insurance is, why it's important, and then we'll get into some of the details of title commitments, exceptions, and all the other things that some of us pretend that we know, but we may not know in full, and it's going to be very, very helpful to you the next time you buy or sell a house. So April, what is title insurance?
Title insurance is obviously insurance that you're purchasing. It's a benefit to the buyer. They're the holder of the insurance. So the purpose is to protect from defects in the title. That could be ownership, that could be liens, that could be back taxes. So that's all the things we're looking for when we open a file. So we know what we need to take care of, what needs to happen to get to closing.
And there are people that specialize in doing these examinations, right?
Correct.
They work in maybe a title mill or...
Yes, so we have a title plant. That's where our examiners are. So we receive the contract, we open an order, we send over to our examiners. So immediately we say, this is our buyer, this is our seller, this is the property. So they start the search of the property and they put together a title commitment. And so that title commitment comes back to us. We use that to determine what needs to happen, to see what's of record, which is on the title commitment, and then what needs to happen for closing. So what we need to take care of, if there is any, cloud and title defects, something that we need to get in order for closing, any liens, it's telling us what the next step is what the title commitment's doing.
That's good. And both seller and buyer in a real estate transaction have title insurance, is that correct?
It's just the holder, just the buyer it has title insurance. So basically a seller, of course title insurance is negotiable. A lot of times the reason behind the seller paying for title insurance is because they're saying, I own this property, it doesn't have any defects, it's free and clear, I'm purchasing this insurance for you. And so then whoever the holder of the property is, the buyer, they hold the insurance and it protects them.
It's interesting too to hear it called insurance because it's entirely possible, highly unlikely, that something could go undiscovered in the course of trying to see if a title is free and clear and able to be transacted from one person to the other.
Correct.
And that insurance protects the buyer and I guess potentially the seller, is that correct? In the event that something does come up?
Right, so if something comes up, we are responsible to figure out what the resolve is of the issue. And so yeah, it is protecting both parties. I guess it's in the name of the holder because really they're the one that now owns the property, so it kind of becomes their problem, so yes, but it's protecting both parties.
Very good. And both parties participate in the payment of that policy at some level when it comes to closing. And if you've ever been a buyer or a seller and you go through those disclosure statements, or somebody like April, an escrow officer, walks you through those settlement statements, the explanations of what title insurance is and protects you against is had. So make sure you're paying attention to that because it's very, very important because, as you mentioned, title commitments are produced as a result of this background investigation and production of policy. And what does that commitment look like? What is it warranting? And then we'll get into maybe some of the exceptions that get kicked out from the policy.
Right. So when you get a title policy, of course, an underwriter is assigned to that, and that's your cover sheet. And then you have your schedule A, B, C, and D. So it's broke down into schedules. So Schedule A is just literally, the proposed buyer. So we take that from the contract. It has the sales price, which is going to be your owner's coverage. So you're purchasing coverage up to the amount of the sales price. And then if there is a loan involved, if there's a lender, they get a mortgagee's policy. So that's all disclosed along with who the vested owner is. So that's part of what our examiners are doing. They're looking through the chain and they're seeing, okay, we say this is the vested owner, the last recorded deed. should be your vested owner, and hopefully that matches your contract, because if not, that's when you get into other issues. And then the last thing on there on Schedule A is the legal description. So whatever we believe the legal description of the property is, and that can change with the survey, or but initially the title commitment is going to show what they found of record is the legal description.
So in the course of a title commitment being issued, it is shared generally if you have realtor representation, real estate representation shared with them, and the prospective buyer and seller, so that everybody gets to examine the same title commitment.
Correct.
If in the course of reviewing the title commitment that's issued, somebody finds an error in Schedule A, these things that you just described, they immediately report it back to you so that it can be corrected or investigated further, correct?
Correct, yes. And that can be as simple as the contract has the misspelling of a name, and then this goes out, and then that's usually when things are caught. Oh, my first name is not spelled like that, it's spelled like this. And it could be something that simple, or it could be, something much bigger, like, hey, this property you're showing is vested in some other name. That's not me. And so now we have to start the research of, okay, what went wrong? Where did it go wrong? And what do we need to fix?
And that'll usually be caught in that instance before the commitment is produced. What happens, though, I know that people who are watching this may be thinking, if there's an error that gets missed, does it mean that the policy is no longer enforceable? For example, something like the legal description. That's an easy one to get a letter transposed or a number transposed. Correct. To miss in the course of reviewing it. Does it mean that the policy is no longer?
No, that does not void your policy. So if in a situation where you get all the way through closing and a policy is issued and somebody realizes your legal description's wrong, we can just file a corrective document in the clerk's office. I mean, there's usually most things are able to be fixed if those things come up, if it happens.
Okay. That's good.
But, yeah.
Well, that's good to know, because I know that question has been posed, and I'm certain I've thought it before, that if there was an error that gets missed, am I no longer insured against potential defects in title? And you heard April use the word defects and clouds on title. You can Google those terms, and there's very clear descriptions and definitions out there, but it essentially means that there's some obstacle from the property transferring from the vested owner, or the seller in this instance, to the buyer. There's something prohibiting that in the course of the title search. So what is Schedule B?
So Schedule B is going to lay out any exceptions to title. So that's all the things that our examiner has found of record. So that could be the restrictive covenants. That's usually the first thing listed on the title commitment. If the property that you're purchasing or selling has anything recorded of record that's restrictions. So that's usually the first thing. And then it breaks down into any, easements, mineral reservations, right-of-ways. I mean, it can be, it can just literally be anything of record. Leases, grazing lease. I mean, we see all kinds of things on Schedule B. So what we're saying is, we know that they're of record, and so we're showing you what they are, and we know they're there, and so therefore they're an exception to your policy. Say we're recorded before the transaction.
And again, like with Schedule A, if something is missed or misstated, it doesn't negate the policy per se. Can it be corrected after the fact too, if there's something that gets missed during the review process?
Yeah, a policy can always be amended if something were to come up. We have to reach out to both parties, disclose what's happening. They may have to sign something, and then we can move forward. Yeah,
and obviously we're superimposing an example of one that has been provided to us too, so you can see what we're talking about. Last question on Schedule B. For example, if restrictions are stated on there, or the leases or other things that you'd mentioned, those are exempt from coverage in the policy if they're not disclosed, or what would be the purpose of listing those on Schedule B as it relates to a title insurance policy?
Well, it's just saying that you can't file a claim against any of those things that are already of record. So you can't come back and say, whatever's on there, an easement, and try to file a claim when we're going to say, no, we've disclosed that to you, it's of record. So that's basically what those exceptions are keeping you from doing.
That's good. And from a buyer and seller's perspective, you obviously want everything disclosed that can be disclosed about the transference of property through a real estate transaction, because if something is missed and it's not covered by title insurance because it was not disclosed or not discoverable, you're ultimately responsible once the property is yours. And obviously that's something you have to deal with outside of a title company. So, well, very good. Well, that's excellent. Schedule B is a challenge for a lot of people, including people who do real estate for a living, because there's so many different things that can show up in Schedule B.
Every title commitment is, it's a new day, a new a new adventure. What's on this one, and are we gonna have to do anything?
Yeah.
So
That's
good.
There's more schedules.
Yes.
So what is Schedule?
So Schedule C is all the items that we have to satisfy in order to close the loan.
Okay.
So that would be where there's many things that could appear there, as simple as a marital status. That's on quite a few title commitments. So we have to know the seller's marital status to see if someone else could possibly have interest in the property, and do we need them to sign something, the deed. It can be any liens, as simple as your mortgage lien. Lien is a very negative word to people, I have realized. So when you say, do you have any liens on the property? They say, oh no. Well, yes, you have a mortgage lien. You make a mortgage payment, that's a lien. So that appears often on Schedule C. We need to get a payoff and take care of that at closing. There can also be survey issues. If we could require a survey if we don't have a good legal description. That would also usually appear on Schedule A sometimes. It'll say, a survey is required. It will always be on C. If we don't see access to a property, that comes more into play when it's acreage, bigger property, and you're selling off. We need to know that there's access. And that could be your clouds in the title. We could say, we see this person still has interest and we need to dispose of that. So that could be hunting someone down and getting rid of someone's interest.
Well, a really great example might be if you live on an acreage tract and the house is on the back side of that tract, but there's, say, a natural gas easement or a power line easement running through the property, and there's no written agreement that you can access your house from the highway going across that easement. That could potentially cause a problem.
Right.
It likely exists, or there wouldn't be an easement there to begin with. But if it's not discoverable, or it's not actually in writing anywhere, maybe it was a handshake deal from the 1950s, you have to have something in writing, or by definition, you can't warranty or guarantee through title insurance that they can access their own house when they buy it.
Right.
Interesting.
So,
how about, so you mentioned survey. If, for example, a survey reflects maybe the property fence goes across the survey line.
So all of those things will come into play on Schedule B. So when we get a survey, we see often it'll say, we're not insuring the part of the property that's inside of the fence but outside of the property line. So whoever put the fence in, who knows how many years back, they didn't follow the property line. So now if you go to the property and you look, you think, okay, well, I own all the way to here. Well, you really don't. You own to the property line, not to the fence. So we're going to disclose any of those things. Surveys are helpful for Schedule B because when our examiners initially do the research, and they find what's of record, they're going to put anything that could possibly apply, as far as easements, right-of-ways, power lines, whatever they're looking, whatever they find. And the survey will tell us whether they actually apply or not. So there's occasions where we get a new survey, we send it over to our examiners for approval, they review it, and they'll make changes to Schedule B. So they may take off, it may say deleted now where there was an easement before. So, it's helpful to have a survey that can.
Absolutely. Well, and also for the benefit of people who are buying and selling homes, and this process may intimidate you a little bit because it sounds very complicated. Escrow officers like April are very good at explaining what you see in those title commitments, and your realtor should be able to too. But there are times when things come up that don't happen very often. For example, there are temporary easements that may show up during title research. For whatever reason, they can exist for construction, they can exist for any number of reasons, and they may be coming up on that temporary easement's deadline. You want to know that because it may impact your access to different parts of the property you're purchasing, or give a neighbor access to your property. And sometimes those easements are not in permanence, I guess is the point. And to the best of a title plant's ability to discover and explore that information, they're trying to find those deadlines so that you, as a purchaser, usually,
Right.
would know.
You're aware.
You're
of,
aware.
Right.
Yeah.
Of everything that's of record
Yeah.
for your property.
So before you get to Schedule D or anything more on Schedule C, I forgot to ask, do title insurance policies have a cutoff date? Do they stop being in effect at the point of transaction?
As long as you own the property, it's in effect. So the minute that you sell the property or convey it to someone else, you lose your policy.
So if I bought my house 3 years ago and I live in it for another 30 years, the title policy is
Correct.
in effect for all
It
that
is
time.
in effect.
Good to know.
Yeah.
What else about Schedule C? Or are we on to Schedule D?
Well, we're kind of moving on. There's a lot of what we call standard language, which does confuse people on Schedule C. So it's a lot of times things that don't necessarily apply to your closing, but could apply to a different closing. Like if it's a construction, if there's a bankruptcy, if there's if we're going to use a power of attorney. So there's a lot of those things that we just refer to as standard language. So it's our job is once we get the title commitment back to skim through and say, do any of these apply, and do I need to take care of any of those things? Get a power of attorney approved by our attorney, a lender's attorney, whatever that situation is for that transaction. So there are those kind of things on there, and sometimes that confuses people because they'll say, I'm not using foreign funds, or I'm not, some of the things that are on there. So those don't always apply to each closing. So it's for us to go through and determine what we need to take care of.
I think it's probably important to note too that we're talking about title insurance in the state of Texas, and specifically
Correct.
the surrounding counties in central Texas, because outside of Texas there may be different requirements. For example, suppose you live in a state that's not a community property state. The need to know marital status is probably less important than it is in Texas.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. I think we're one of the few community rights states, from
Well,
my understanding. So.
And types of surveys differ state to state. So a meets and bounds survey in Texas is going to be very different from a point-to-point survey in another
Right,
state. Or
right.
Sometimes there are townships and different things like that. So legal descriptions are different in Texas than they might be anywhere. However, title insurance in general is broadly similar in what it tries to protect. Just the details, depending on where you live or doing a
Yes.
transaction, may be different. So that's important to note.
Yes, that is correct. And then the last is Schedule D. So every contract that we open, policy that we issue, is assigned an underwriter. So it lays out your underwriter's information. It lays out we're the issuing agency, so it has our information on there. And then it's just basically a summary of, your policy amount and any endorsements if you were requiring any endorsements through a lender or on your contract.
What
That's
is an
all
endorsement?
So an endorsement is additional insurance. Most lenders require a few different endorsements that have to do with survey coverage and taxes. And if you're in a subdivision with an HOA, so there's different things that, of course, it's different for each property,
Sure.
but each transaction. But yeah, so those endorsements. And then as far as any owners coverage endorsements, the main one that we see is the survey coverage. So that's on your contract that you've told us when we get the contract whether you're wanting that additional survey coverage.
Is it possible if something shows up on Schedule B that is not covered, is there additional coverage that can be purchased separate from the main title policy, like some kind of supplemental policy to cover something that may show up on Schedule B as an exception?
There are some endorsements that you could purchase. I don't know that there's any that's additional coverage just for general.
Just a case-by-case basis
yes,
thing.
Yes.
And so if you do have something show up on one of these schedules that causes you pause, you should ask your agent or speak to the escrow officer at your title company to find out, is there a way to cover this? Because I didn't know that it was going to be accepted or excluded from coverage in title insurance. And, and it's probably worth the question. Then you have to make a determination on whether it's worth the cost.
And then we can look into if there is any options and go from there. Yeah.
Just, I guess this is a question that's hard to answer, but in terms of schedules A, B, C, and D, the ones that you need to pay closest attention to in terms of coverage, I would be speaking as a realtor, and it would be Schedule B.
Right.
But from your perspective as an escrow officer and somebody who closes transactions all the time, are there places that people miss that they should be reviewing closely?
I would definitely say Schedule B is very important. Sometimes people come back, after closing and say, "Well, I didn't realize that there was this on the property," and there it is on Schedule B, that said there was a lease or whatever's going on, So I would definitely say, for a buyer looking at it, that's probably one of the most important things to look at, to see what's of record on the property that you're purchasing. It's all important. It's all important for us. Your legal description and your vested name is very important for title, to make sure that all that's correct and it is what it's supposed to be. And then, of course, Schedule C, making sure that we are taking care of all of those items that have to be taken care of to give you a title policy in the end. So I definitely say A, B, and C are all important, but I think B is easily overlooked.
And sometimes it's intimidating to ask questions about things you don't understand. And that's where people like April and other escrow officers, they take this very seriously, because it's obviously not just their job, but they also are trying to protect both sellers and buyers in the course of a transaction. Real estate is stressful enough. Transacting property is stressful enough. You want to make sure that you've got people looking out for your best interests. So if there's something you don't understand and maybe your agent can't explain it in a way that's satisfactory to you,
right?
People like April who do this all the time, they're happy to spend the time explaining it.
Yes, yep. So I take phone calls all the time, or someone's saying, "Okay, explain this to me," or "Why is this done this way?" or "What does this mean?" And and then we work through to, I want them to understand when we hang up the phone, or to find more information for them that I'm going to get back to them with. So definitely don't mind answering questions at all and explaining how this process works.
That's great. Anything else before we shut this down?
I don't think so. No.
Well, I'm going to encourage people, if there's something you want to know about title insurance and we didn't address it during the course of this video, to either drop a note to me. My contact info will be in the video, or I think comments will probably be active.
Okay.
I may monitor those, and I know I can always ask April, "Hey, we didn't get to this," or "This isn't something I can answer or should answer."
I'm sure there's things that,
Yeah.
because every transaction is different.
They're all different. But if there's something specific you want to know, and it probably shouldn't be transaction specific if you didn't handle the closing, but if there are questions in general that you want to know the answers to, submit them, and we can get them answered, and we'll make sure that you get an answer personally. And if there's something that you think may benefit others in sharing this information, share it with them. So April, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, no.
This was great for me too, by the way.
Well, good.
All right.
Good.